Sophie Calendar, 18 years old, auburn hair and a loose updo, gray t-shirt, white cardigan, the kind of girl who looks younger than her age, until you see her eyes, which carry something older and steadier than 18 has any right to produce. A high school senior in the small town of Millbrook, Indiana, 3 weeks from graduation, standing at the beginning of what should have been the best year of her life. She was her grandmother's girl, through and through, the one who had sat at Eleanor Calendar's kitchen table every Sunday for 15 years, learning to bake and listen and think carefully before speaking. She had her grandmother's patience. She had, as it turned out, also inherited her grandmother's foresight. Eleanor Calendar, gone 2 years now, 78 when she passed, sharp until the last month. The kind of woman who kept her important papers in a cedar box in alphabetical order and who had, over a long and observant life, learned to love her family clearly, which meant seeing them as they were, not only as she wished them to be. She had loved her son Robert. She had loved her daughter-in-law Patricia. She had loved her granddaughter, Sophie, with the particular depth of a woman who recognized in a child the best of what she herself had tried to be. And she had, with the quiet practicality of someone who has lived long enough to plan carefully, made sure that what she left behind went where she intended it to go. There are people who love us so well and so far ahead that we don't understand the full measure of it until years after they are gone. They leave things for us, not always things we can hold. Sometimes just a way of seeing, a habit of patience, a lesson that seems small when it was given and turns out, on a particular morning when we need it most, to be exactly the right size. Eleanor Calendar left her granddaughter Sophie both kinds. And on the morning after Sophie's 18th birthday, when the thing Eleanor had quietly anticipated came to pass, Sophie understood, for the first time, the full depth of being loved by someone who thought ahead. The birthday party had been on a Saturday, not a large one. Their house was not a large party kind of house, and Sophie was not a large party kind of girl. 15 people in the living room, streamers in blue and white, the sheet cake from the grocery store bakery that Sophie had requested specifically because it was the same kind her grandmother had always ordered for her birthdays, and the sugary frosting that she knew was not sophisticated and did not care. Her parents were there. Robert Calendar, 51, her father, a man of pleasant surface, and beneath it, the particular restlessness of someone who has always felt that his life should have amounted to more than it had, and who had spent 20 years finding quiet ways to act on that feeling. Patricia Calendar, 49, her mother, who was not unkind, not deliberately, but who had a long habit of following Robert's lead in the areas where she should have found her own footing. Her younger sister Dana was there too. 14, bright-eyed, innocent of everything that was happening around her, in ways that Sophie was grateful for. Her best friend Mara, her school counselor Mrs. Okafor, who had come as a friend rather than a professional. A handful of neighbors who had known Sophie since she was small. It was a good party. Sophie laughed genuinely. She blew out 18 candles and made a wish she kept to herself. She ate 2 slices of cake and felt, for those hours, the warmth of being surrounded by people who were glad she existed. Her parents gave her a card with $100 in it. They were warm and celebratory, and her father made a toast that was generous, and her mother cried a little, which was genuine. She went to bed that night feeling the clean, uncomplicated happiness of a birthday well spent. She did not know, going to sleep, what the morning held. She had known about the inheritance since she was 16. Eleanor had told her herself, directly, at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon in October, 2 years before she died. Eleanor had been diagnosed the previous spring. She was not dramatic about it. She had simply, at some point, decided that the people who needed to know certain things should know them while she was still there to explain them properly. She had left Sophie the farmhouse on Glenwood Road, the one Eleanor had grown up in, that had been in the family for 60 years, and the surrounding 4 acres. She had also left Sophie a trust account. Modest by the standards of people with real money, significant by any standard Sophie had ever lived inside, funded over decades of careful saving and a small inheritance from Eleanor's own parents. "It's yours," Eleanor had said, over chamomile tea and the remains of a Sunday pie. "All of it. When you turn 18, she had looked at Sophie with the level gaze of a woman making sure she was understood. "I've arranged it carefully. There's a lawyer. His name is Gerald Marsh. His office is on Birch Street. He has the documents. Everything is structured so that it comes directly to you." A pause. "Directly to you, Sophie. No detours. Sophie, 16, had listened, had understood, had filed it in the place where you file things an adult tells you that you are not quite old enough yet to fully absorb. She understood it better now. She came downstairs at 8:15 on Sunday morning to find both her parents already at the kitchen table. This was unusual. Robert was not a before 9 person on Sundays. Patricia was rarely downstairs before the coffee was already made by someone else. They were both dressed, both sitting straight. There were papers on the table, a small stack, face down, which Robert moved slightly as Sophie entered, the gesture of a man adjusting something he has not quite decided how to present. Sophie poured herself coffee, sat down, looked at her father. She had learned over 18 years, a particular way of beginning difficult conversations, a warmth in his voice that arrived slightly before the actual warmth did, like an opening chord played just a half step off. She heard it now. "Big day yesterday," he said. "It was nice," she said. She kept her voice even. She had her grandmother's patience. He glanced at Patricia, a small look, the kind between two people who have rehearsed a conversation. "So," he said, "there are some things we should talk about. Now that you're 18, he laid his hand on the papers. "About Grandma's estate." Sophie waited. He explained it with the careful architecture of a man who had thought about sequencing. The farmhouse, he said, needed significant repairs. The roof, the foundation, the heating system. He had had it assessed. He named a number that was high but not implausible. He said that maintaining an empty property was a continuing cost. He said that he and Patricia had discussed it, and they felt the most sensible thing, given all of this, was to sell the farmhouse and consolidate the funds into a single family account that could be managed. His word, managed more efficiently. He pushed the papers toward her. The top sheet was a property transfer authorization. Her name was on the signature line. The second sheet was a trust dissolution form. Sophie looked at the papers. She looked at her father's face. She looked at her mother's face, which was trying to be reassuring and landing somewhere closer to apologetic. She thought about her grandmother sitting across a kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, looking at her with those level eyes, saying directly to you, Sophie. No detours. She thought about Gerald Marsh, Birch Street. She picked up her coffee cup, set it down, looked at her father. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Marsh first," she said. The silence that followed was the kind that contains a great deal. Robert's expression moved through several things: surprise, recalibration, a brief flash of something that was not quite anger, but was adjacent to it, before settling on the careful neutrality of a man deciding how to proceed. "That's not really necessary," he said. "Everything here is standard. It just needs your signature." "I understand," Sophie said. "I'd still like to speak with him first." Patricia said gently, "Honey, Dad has already been in touch with Gerald. It's all been arranged." "Then Gerald can confirm that for me directly," Sophie said, still patient. The patience that does not waver because it is not performing, it simply is. She excused herself from the table. She went upstairs. She called Gerald Marsh's emergency line. Eleanor had given her the number, written in her grandmother's careful hand on a small card tucked inside the cedar box, because Eleanor had thought of everything. Gerald Marsh answered on the third ring. He was 64. He had been Eleanor Callender's attorney for 22 years. He had the steady, unhurried manner of a man who has heard most things and is rarely surprised, and who understands that his job is not to manage people's emotions, but to protect their interests with complete fidelity. He listened to Sophie describe the morning. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he said, "Sophie, I need you to listen to me carefully." She listened. He explained what her parents had not. The farmhouse was not, in fact, in deteriorating condition. He had received a call from Robert 3 weeks ago. He had been expecting this call, he said with the quiet candor of a man who had seen the shape of things coming, and had declined to assist with what was being asked. The papers on the table, which Sophie described, had been prepared by a different attorney. They were technically valid forms. Sophie's signature on them would have transferred the property and dissolved the trust. He then told her about the other document. Eleanor had added a provision 2 years before her death. After that Sunday kitchen table conversation, as it turned out, a secondary trust structure already activated on Sophie's 18th birthday by automatic legal trigger that placed the farmhouse and the financial trust under independent trustee management for 6 months. During those 6 months, Sophie could review, consult, and make informed decisions. No transfer could be executed without both her signature and the trustee's co-signature. Your grandmother, Gerald said, asked me not to tell you about this provision until you needed to know it. She said, he paused, and when he continued, his voice had something in it that was not strictly professional. She said she hoped you would never need to know. But if you did, she wanted you to have exactly enough time to think clearly. Sophie sat on the edge of her bed. She looked at the small framed photograph on her nightstand, Eleanor at 65, in the farmhouse kitchen, laughing at something, flour on her hands. She did not cry, not yet. She would later, in the particular way you cry for someone when you understand, for the first time, a new dimension of how much they loved you. For now, she just sat with it, with the knowledge of what her grandmother had done quietly, too, years in advance. From a kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, thinking, I hope you never need this, but here it is, just in case. The conversation with her parents that followed was not easy. Sophie did not approach it with anger, not because she didn't feel anything, but because she understood that anger deployed, without precision tends to produce heat rather than light, and what this situation required was light. She told them what she knew. She showed them, calmly, with the papers in front of her, exactly where the plan had failed and why. She did not perform this. She was not cold. She was simply clear. Robert's response moved through its own stages. Defensiveness first, the roof really does need work, he said, which may even have been true. Then a kind of diminishment. It was for the family, he said, which was partly what he had told himself. Then finally, when the architecture had been taken down piece by a daughter who had her grandmother's eyes and her grandmother's patience, something quieter, he looked at the table. Patricia cried. Dana, who came downstairs at 9:30 for cereal, and found the three of them at the table with papers between them and faces that told a long story, looked around carefully and said nothing, and poured her cereal and stayed. Sophie looked at her father for a long moment. She thought about 18 years of Sunday dinners and school plays and the particular complicated love of a family that has never been simple. She thought about the fact that he was not a villain. She had thought about this already, was still thinking about it. He was a man who had made a choice that was wrong, that had come from the part of himself that was scared and small, and had never quite arrived at what he thought his life should be. That did not make it acceptable. It also did not make him a person she was finished with. I need some time, she said finally, and I need you to understand that what you tried to do cannot be undone by a conversation. A pause, but I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you. She gathered the papers from the table, both stacks, and took them upstairs. She called Mara that afternoon. Mara, who had been her best friend since 4th grade, and who had the gift of listening. Without filling every silence with words, listened. Then Mara said, Your grandma was something else. She really was, Sophie said. She knew, Mara said. It was not quite a question. She knew enough, Sophie said. She knew enough to plan for it. She thought about what that meant. To love someone clearly, not ideally, not as you wish they were, but as they are, with the parts that disappoint you, and the parts that need protecting from, and to act on that love practically, quietly without drama, so that the person you loved would be held even in the moments. You could no longer be there to hold them yourself. That was what Eleanor had done, not with anger, not with suspicion as the primary emotion, with love as the primary emotion and clear eyes as the instrument of it. The 6 months passed. Sophie graduated in June, Mara beside her, Mrs. Okafor in the faculty row, Dana in the audience with her parents waving a handmade sign. She walked across the stage in the gymnasium of Millbrook High School and received her diploma and thought about all the ordinary moments that had accumulated into this one and felt grateful for most of them. She enrolled in the architecture program at the State University in the fall. She had wanted to study buildings since. She was 8 years old and had asked her grandmother why some houses felt like homes and some didn't. And Eleanor had said because someone cared when they built them, which was not a technical answer, but was the right one. The farmhouse on Glenwood Road was assessed properly that summer. The roof did need some work. The foundation did not. The heating system was aging but serviceable. She had it repaired properly with the right people for significantly less than the number her father had named in the kitchen. She spent 3 Sundays that August cleaning and airing the farmhouse with Mara and Dana and Mrs. Okafor's daughter, who was studying interior design and offered suggestions with the enthusiasm of someone who understood that old houses are not problems to be solved, but stories to be continued. She did not move in. Not yet. She was not ready for that. but she opened the windows and let the August air through and stood in the kitchen, where her grandmother had stood for 40 years and looked at the table, where she had been told the truth about being loved. She set her hand flat on the surface of it. The wood was warm from the afternoon sun. Her relationship with her parents rebuilt itself. The way real things rebuild, slowly, imperfectly, without any single moment of resolution. Robert did not become a different man overnight. Patricia did not suddenly find the footing she had always deferred. But there were conversations over months that were more honest than anything that had come before. Robert said once, on a Sunday dinner in October, without looking up from his plate, "I'm sorry, Sophie. I want you to know I'm sorry." It was not elaborate. She believed it. She said, "I know, Dad," and she meant that too. On a Sunday afternoon in November, Sophie drove out to Millbrook Cemetery with a bunch of chrysanthemums from the farmer's market, yellow ones, Eleanor's favorite, and stood at her grandmother's headstone in the thin autumn light. She did not speak out loud. She was not that kind of person, and she did not think Eleanor was that kind of ghost. She just stood there for a while, in the quiet, thinking about a woman who had sat at a kitchen table and thought, "I hope she never needs this." But just in case. Thinking about the cedar box in alphabetical order, the lawyer on Birch Street, the provision that had activated automatically on a birthday morning, doing its quiet work without anyone asking it to. Thinking about what it means to love someone all the way forward, past the days you will see, into the days you won't, and to do it not with grand gestures, but with practical, careful, specific acts of foresight. The kind that say, "I see who you are. I see what you will need. Here it is, already waiting." She stayed until the light went low. Then she drove home through the Indiana November, past the farmhouse on Glenwood Road with its repaired roof and its lit front window, and she thought about kindness, the real kind, the deep kind, the kind that asked nothing back, because it was never about anything other than the person it was given to. Perhaps this is what the long loves teach us. Not the ones that announce themselves, not the ones that want to be thanked. The ones that work quietly, that plan ahead, that hold a door open in a hallway you haven't entered yet, and wait, patiently, without any need to see it happen, for you to arrive. We carry those loves with us longer than we carry anything else. They are in the cedar box on the shelf, in the careful handwriting on the card, in the provision that activates on a birthday, morning without ceremony or explanation, in the chamomile tea and the Sunday pie, and the level eyes of someone who loved you clearly, all the way to the end and then a little further still. That is the whole of it. That is more than enough.